Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am in the beautiful Napa Valley with Gamble Family Vineyards owner Tom Gamble. Tom, welcome to Wine Soundtrack, and tell us about Gamble Family Vineyards.
Thanks for having me, Allison. Well, Gamble Family Vineyards, I'm a third-generation Napa Valley farmer and first-generation vintner. Ooh. And so I'm just carrying on in footsteps. I stand on the footsteps of my predecessors, and I stand on some broad shoulders, trying to make them broader and sustain this, our lands and our business for generations to come.
Wow. So we're sitting here on your property. How many acres is your property, and how much is planted to grapes?
We have, my wife and I own a little over 200 acres, and about 175 acres of those are in grapes. We're a small winery, and we sell most of our grapes. So it still says farmer on the tax return.
And so how much wine are you making in total, and what grapes are planted here?
So in total we make about 10,000 cases. About 3,000 to 4,000 cases of that is sold here at the winery or to members and guests. And then the rest are wines that are sold to restaurants and in the wholesale world and on the website.
So you covered the markets and grapes, and we're in Napa, so obviously Cabernet, right?
Cabernet Sauvignon. Sauvignon Blanc is our only white wine. And then we also have Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot. We also grow Petit Syrah. I just planted some Malbec as well. And I think I got them all there.
Yeah, well, you got a lot of property. It's hard to keep track.
I grow a little Semillon for a special client, and have another white grape imported from some weird place in the world, and I'm not allowed to talk about it yet. So that's a tease.
Ooh.
For the future.
You're teasing me too. That's not fair.
Hey, turn the tables on you already.
So, Tommy, you said you're a third-generation Napaite, or Napa resident. And I'm curious, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Relevant to wine, it would have to be the smell of dirt and dust. And when you're really little, wine is still icky, and you're not an adolescent looking to sneak it. But it really was the farming aspect. And I grew up around all the aromas of the soil. And my family really wasn't grape growers. I was the first one to become a professional grape grower and then a vintner. But so here in the middle of the Napa Valley, we still had hay fields and livestock and tomatoes and orchards. And we had all kinds of age-appropriate and maybe not so age-appropriate chores and jobs that we did. And it just brought me in contact with the earth and the smell of hot metal from the equipment and just animals and horses and cows and sheep and pigs and all that kind of stuff. So it really are all the elemental elements are my first memory.
Wow. So obviously you grew up in the Napa Valley, and you have, I'm assuming, been exposed to amazing wines from the valley and beyond. I'm curious if you recall one of your first aha moments.
Yeah, it was a Chateau Souverain wine that Lee Stewart made, and that was when Souverain was in the facility that's now called Burgess Cellars, and up on Howe Mountain. And Lee Stewart was one of the first quote-unquote bohemian or iconoclastic winemakers, and he taught a lot of the young winemakers of the era, like Warren Winarski. And so he there was a little hobby vineyard on the family property, and he was making some wine for it. and he made wine for my parents in 61, 63, and 65, the birth date of their children. And I can't remember which vintage it was that I tried first, but it was astounding. And it had to have been at least 10 or 15 years old by the time I tasted it. And we made wines in a much different way, just because the grapes wouldn't ripen like they do now. So the wines really did have to age, because they were what we would consider underripe and needed time to age to mellow the tannins and meld with the acid profile, but they aged incredibly. They were all 20-year agers.
Wow. Wow.
And so that's really set me on the path of wine loving.
Wow. Wow. So as that set you on the path, if we were to come into your home today, what sort of wines would we find in your cellar? Is it mostly Napa wines? Is it a nice mix of other producers or international? And if so, what regions?
Well, you'd find a very depleted wine cellar, because we're going to remodel our house, and we've been building this wine business, so we've been drinking our cellar and not really reinvesting in it, because this has taken up a lot of it. But you would find a pretty good selection of Northern Rhones. You would find what's left of my Bordeaux collection of first gross, but I had to give up buying those a while back, because I got into the winemaking business, and the prices of those wines skyrocketed. Mm-hmm. You would also find some Barolos, and so those are probably my. Oh, and there's definitely some wonderful Burgundies in there too. And then you would find a good number of Napa wines as well. And then lastly, you would probably find a good collection of Sonoma Coast, the true Sonoma Coast Pinot Noirs.
Wow. So you said you've been depleting your cellar. So is there something you opened recently that drank really well?
I can't. And it was a six-pack that kind of got forgotten for a few years, but it was a 2013 Rain Pinot Noir from the Sonoma Coast, and it's made by Carlo Mondavi, I believe, one of Robert Mondavi's grandsons. I think he's Tim Mondavi's son.
Wow. So, do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Not if you're judging from my wine cellar. I think that it's the guy in the beer commercial said it best: "Stay curious, my friend," and wine is a great adventure, and you really should stay curious. So I think that there are perfect varieties for certain regions and even for certain sites within that region. And I think that we are in Napa Valley and in the U.S., we're a very young wine region, and we're still figuring that out. And that's why I've planted some of those other varieties to stay curious, rekindle interest in some of those interesting varieties, and just my sense of what might grow well on that site, because that's what it comes down to.
Sure. So obviously, lots of people will ask how a wine tastes and want to know information, and one source is wine critics and scores. What's your opinion on them?
Wine critics play a very important role. One can argue about those last 10 points, but I remember the era before wine scores, and I remember the rise of Robert Parker and Wine Spectator, and they did a great service to the wine consumer. There was a lot of wine being fobbed off that was technically incorrect, but people were intimidated into thinking that it was supposed to be good wine. So they got rid of a lot of technically incorrect wine. And as they went on, they had their own flavor profiles that they started to prefer. A lot of wines got made that way. I think that there's a trend now growing with this sort of interview and the internet, and a younger generation wanting be more experiential about the wine. And frankly, another great service that the Wine Score folks did was drive more interest in wine to a generation that didn't know as much about wine. They knew more than their parents did, but they didn't know as much as a 25-year-old kid these days who just loves wine and is really into it and has the internet at the disposal. So we're in kind of like a peer review mode. There's all kinds of people relying on all kinds of people on the internet who are judging wine. They may be a minor reviewer or somebody with a lot more fame, but they find the people whose palates that they're in sync with or trust or appreciate the way that they explore different wines. And I think it's all for the good because the more people who are interested in wine and the culture of wine and all that means, it's a whole world. It's not just food, it's culture, it's travel. It makes people interested in the world, and I think that that's all very, very important. So I celebrate the diversity of people talking about wine right now.
So for your own self, red, white, or rosé?
What's on the table for tonight, honey? it really, and then it's that, but if it's a long day, and even if she has cooked a wonderful meal, we might just say, well, what's left over from the tasting room, and not worry about it. Don't get hung up on wine pairings. Try everything. And there's the standard things. I mean, we eat a lot of heavy salads, and so our whites do very well with that, but so does our Paramount, which is a Bordeaux-style red blend, which has Merlot and Cab Franc and Petit Verdot and Cabernet Sauvignon in it, and focuses on the red fruit flavors. And that goes very well with heavy salads or even a heavier fish dish.
Well, it's funny. You beat me to that question. I wanted the simple red, white, or rosé.
I'm not giving it to you.
You're not giving it to me. No, but it was great because my next question was about food pairing. But I think that's really an interesting thing to have a red wine with a hearty salad or something you wouldn't expect. And, I think that it's great to not necessarily follow rules, as you're saying, but just to see what's out there.
That's true. And we make Napa's kind of known for its hearty wines. We're on the more elegant side of Napa, basically because of the taste profile of those earlier wines. I think that were formative in developing my palate. And so, and with those heavy salads, maybe a lighter red wine or a light Pinot Noir would be good. But and then if she's grilling, and we're into grilling season now, and so there's plenty of opportunity for not just grilled meats, but we have a very big garden, and so there could be a lot of large mushrooms and asparagus. We're coming to the end of our asparagus season, and root vegetables that will do very well with a nice, heartier Cabernet Sauvignon.
And so I know you wouldn't tell me red, white, or rosé, but what about still or sparkling?
Sparkling is what my wife and I romance is based on back in the day, and still today. Yes, we're still romantic. But we still, and so we still enjoy quite a bit of true champagnes, or there seems to be a Strasbourg Blanc de Blanc always on ice.
So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to taste Gamble Family Vineyards wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
Nuance, elegance, freshness, excellent food pairing wines, excellent as standalone wines too. Lower alcohol, allowing the terroir to express itself, and we work really hard to make our single vineyards taste like what we think the place is that makes those vineyards special. And I choose my vineyards very carefully, and for very specific reasons.
Well, speaking of vineyards, you live on your property, you're in the middle of it. I see vines right outside the window right now. You spend a lot of time in the vines. How much vintage variation are you seeing year to year? Do you tend to, as a farmer, as a grower, do you see a lot of similarity, a lot of differences? What's it like here?
Probably a lot of people in Napa won't want me to say this, but Napa Valley is world-renowned, and it is one of the great wine-growing regions in the world. It also has arguably the easiest grape-growing climate of all those wonderful other grape-growing regions. It's really Goldilocks. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. And we can have long runs of excellent vintages. I would say 2012 to 2017 were incredible. That's not to knock 18 or 19. The 17 ended with a fire, but all that was at the end of the season. And 18 and 19, there's nothing to sneeze at either. I was doing some blending trials for final blending trials on the 19, and they're lovely. So variations can, like in 2011, can be extreme. It was a very cool year, and then we're in a drought right now, and this year seems to be shaping up. It's the second year of a drought, so it could be very much like 2015, I think, or maybe 2016, in that there wasn't a lot of rain, and the vines are struggling after 2 seasons of not having a lot of rain. They're starting off well, and it looks really beautiful, but we'll have to see what the temperatures are like, because that could make them struggle a little too much, and we may have to drop more crop than we want to maintain the vines their own health, and maintain their ability to ripen the remaining fruit to the standards we want.
So are there signs or predictors you look for that will tell you how a vintage will look? Or, at this point everything looks good and it's sort of like we just don't know until Mother Nature tells us?
It's a little of both. Long-range forecasting is better than it was, but just this year, it actually we had a dry and actually fairly cold late winter, and then we had bud break, and it got hot, but then it got cold again, and then it warmed up perfectly for flowering and set, and then it cooled down again. So it's like So we caught up with the late bud break, so we're about right on schedule as to where we typically are, but I'm still not certain where we're going to be. All signs are very solid right now, but we could have a heat spike. We could have some weird thunderstorm like in 2009, and parts of the valley get hailed upon and the crop gets wrecked. So you are messing with Mother Nature, and you better have crop insurance.
So when you're walking through your vines, do you have a personal relationship with your vineyard? Do you talk to the vines? As a farmer, what have you found is the communication level with the grapes?
I'm probably usually talking to myself, but the longer I'm in the vineyard, the less talking to myself I'll do, because my mind, or at least the conscious part, starts to go away. And if I'm really smart, I turn off the cell phone and just pay attention and be in the moment and see and feel and just be in the vineyard. What's the feel of the soil under my foot for that time of year? Are the plants looking healthy? Are they droopy? Are they overvigorous? And or are they looking pallid because they had some insect bite on them and give them a disease. So I'm not the first one to say it, but the best thing to do to communicate with a vineyard is to put your footprints in it.
Mm-hmm. So if space aliens were to land on your property and put their footprints into your vineyard, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with?
Well, we are known for our hospitality, so if they like wine, I would probably start them with this, either our Heart Block or high-end Sauvignon Blanc. It might be how threatened I feel by space aliens, or just the regular Sauvignon Blanc. And then, if they had time, and I'd find out who the designated spaceship driver is, and then say, "Here's a glass of water," and give, and then work through our wine lineup.
So if they're friendly and have a designated driver, they get the whole lineup.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Otherwise, I'm running away.
So, Tom, when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you always know you wanted to be a farmer?
Yes, I did. I think on a small level. In fact, my dad and my uncle, they were following in their own father's footsteps, and who was a great agricultural businessman in the early and middle part of the last century. And they had big shoes to fill, and so my dad started the operations and ran the operations. That was his strength, and my uncle ran all the business side of things. And so he had to sit behind the desk, and when you're little, you want to be riding the horse and helping brand the cattle and do all that kind of fun stuff. And so my brother and I would have fights about who could be the farmer and who would have to sit behind a desk. And so I'm the farmer.
So you won the battle?
No, I don't know that I won that battle. I mean, you grow up and as your business grows and it becomes a little more complex, and as I mentioned, I made the conscious decision to vertically integrate, and I thought there was a lot of sustainability reasons to do so, to add the wine, and that has that's become ever more complex, and the last year or so has made it even more challenging. And so I'm on the Farmer 12-step program, which is you have to admit you have a problem. That's delegation. So I've learned how to delegate,
okay.
Or at least I'm still learning. I haven't apologized to everybody.
So you're not at step 2 yet.
I've got a long ways to go.
So when you're not working and trying to work through the 12 steps of the farmer program, how do you like to spend your free time?
Napping. And after the nap, my wife and I are a wonderful pair because we both like the outdoors, and we are in love as much with the natural elements, and we love to. It just so happens that we typically pick vineyards that have a lot of biodiversity on it, and maybe that's what attracts us to them, and so we just love to spend time on our lands and walking and hiking. She's an expert bird watcher.
Wow.
And she has this amazing kitchen garden that I mentioned. And the animals are always in there, and we can always find, she can find 25 birds species while she's still sipping coffee in her PJs.
Wow. So you mentioned that you and your wife still have a little romanticism left. You bring out the bubbles. When you're planning a romantic evening with your wife, what else do you guys like to drink beyond bubbles? Or once it's bubbles, it doesn't really matter what comes next?
Well, we're older now, so we can't drink as much if we're going to have a romantic evening.
you stop at the bubbles?
It really, no, well, usually we don't, and it really is meal dependent, like I mentioned before. So it really is. So we'll have some still wine, and it just depends on the meal. Maybe we'll have a little of the Sauvignon Blanc, or if it's our own wine, it'll often be the Paramount or the Cabernet Franc that I haven't mentioned before, and she likes those, and those are pretty good.
Or you go into your depleting cellar.
No,
hence why it's depleting.
Hence, and there is that as well. We've tried to make more of an effort to do that because we're like a lot of people. We collect all this wine and then we don't drink it, and so you have to make a conscious decision. And we've all been there where we've kept the wine too long, and it's not even interesting anymore.
That's true. If you wait too long. So you were speaking earlier about a work ethic or a life ethic that you follow, a motto. Is there another piece of advice or a piece of advice that was ever given to you that you really carry with you through your work or through your life and how you want to live or work?
Well, I guess there's a few, but I'm trying to think of a lot of the advice I got was really by observing conscientious people like my parents, who maybe at the time were of a generation that were not very verbal about things, and but you watched and you learned by their doing, which was you always knew, even if they couldn't express it, and that you were loved, and they showed by the intensity of their work ethic that they loved what they did. And they never put any pressure on us to follow in their footsteps. And so, if it's real love, set it free and it will return. So that has been really for not only myself, but the others in my generation, that has been something that has happened to one degree or another. And a good piece of coaching advice that I got from a coach later in life was he was telling me about a saying he had heard, and it says, practice 7th-generation thinking. And that really sums up a lot about our approach, my family's approach and mine, about thinking sustainably, trying to leave things better than what you found them for your family, for the environment, for your employees, for the community.
Beautiful. So when you look back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
Marrying my wife. No, I'm serious. She's very supportive of these efforts, and this is not the easiest business. In fact, it's a very hard business because you are messing around with Mother Nature, and we have big restrictions on how we can sell our wine because of a constitutional amendment that ended prohibition, but did not give us free access to the markets like all these other products. Mm-hmm. And it's loosened up immensely during my adult life, but there are still all these hoops you have to jump through that you do not have to jump through to sell something in other industries. So and so you have the farming aspect that always has that weather risk and variation in crop yield and things like that can affect your income year to year. And then there's also just the wine sales risk. Mm-hmm. And so there's lots of decisions to make, lots of folks to support. Last year was obviously very tough, and my wife and I made a commitment to each other one night, and I came to work and told everybody that nobody was going to be let go if we could at all help it, and we didn't let anybody go. In fact, we hired a couple extra people to help us rethink how we approach certain aspects of the business.
That's great. That's great. So complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like...
I don't know.
You've never seen one?
Well, breakfast. But my Sauvignon Blanc's pretty good with scrambled eggs.
Okay. So now we're sitting in a dining room, a tasting room, but it's like a dining room in here. And wines are on the table, Gamble Family Vineyards. You're sitting here, and we've got an empty chair next to you. Who from any walk of life, living or deceased, would you love to be drinking a bottle, a glass, 3 bottles of Gamble Family Vineyards with you?
No, I should have seen that coming and have some witty answer. You know what? I'd say my ancestors, because I hope they're proud of me for carrying the torch.
I love that. So, you are a farmer. You were talking about the challenges that you face, that, this is a pretty beautiful climate, that, pretty easy growing here in Napa, but at the same time, we've had fires. We know there's climate change. You might have a hailstorm, as you said. There are a lot of things that can happen. So, do you think that we'll be drinking wine in 500 years, making wine in 500 years, well past our lives?
Yes, I do. There's just something about it. I don't know how we'll be enjoying it. I don't know what varieties will be king in Napa Valley, for instance. When I was born, Zinfandel was the number 1 grape in Napa Valley. So we have had changes. There was even a time in the 70s when Chenin Blanc was the rising star.
And Riesling, too, at one point, right?
There was a lot of Riesling. I can remember in what's now our vineyard in Rutherford that was my wife's uncle owned, and the grapes went to Freemark Abbey in Rutherford Hill. But it was a wild time in I would say in the 60s and 70s. It was full-blown experimentation. Cabernet Sauvignon right next to Riesling, right next to Chenin Blanc and Chardonnay and Syrah, or Sangiovese, planted in the worst place possible for Sangiovese. But you don't know until you try, I guess. And there was just this wonderful level of experimentation, and people didn't take themselves too seriously, and they just wanted to try things. So, and I just look back upon human history, and they found, the archaeologists have found that 4,000-year-old winery, or remains of one, and I guess
in Armenia.
Mm-hmm. And it's so you said 500, so I think that was 4,000 years ago. So I think we have a good shot, no matter how advanced technically we become, or perhaps because we become more advanced technically, and we sit here doing podcasts with iPhones and things like that, that we couldn't have dreamed of just a few years ago. And the more divorced from nature and tactile things that we get as we become more technically sophisticated, there's this yet yearning for that sense of connection. Mm-hmm. And wine is a sense of connection, not only to the earth, but to the people you're sharing it with. I mean, the back of our bottles always say, we hope you enjoy this wine over several hours with good food and those you love. And so there's a sense of craft, sometimes art, and very much a sense of humanity when you share food and wine together around a table like we were talking about. And it kind of gets us out of our day and helps us remember what's important in life.
Well, let's talk about wine and food and art. and music. And play a little game here. Looking at your wines, as you said, as you said in your description, wine will fulfill you and fill an emotion. And there's a time and a place for every wine, just like music gives you the same sensation. So genre, musician, as specific or as detailed as you want, or as general. Your Sauvignon Blanc, the Gamble Family Vineyard 2020 Sauvignon Blanc that is sitting right in front of me in my glass. I'm going to see if you're right, because I'm going to taste it and see if I agree.
Well, I was reading this for a completely different thing, but it has a golden yellow color, and there are whole articles written about music and how it can go with wine and color. And so this has a golden hue, and I would not pick this music, but it's a quote.
Okay.
It's a quote by Jimi Hendrix, who said, "My color is yellow, but my yellow is not mellow."
So we're going to say Jimi Hendrix just for that?
No, just for the quote.
Okay.
Just because everybody thinks of mellow yellow.
Right.
And he took it and some other musical artist, I forget his name, and he was more spacey and hippie than Jimmy, had a song called Mellow Yellow, but
this is not a mellow wine.
no, well, it's not a mellow wine. It has a buoyancy on the palate. It's vivacious. So what would I say that I would like to, I'd almost say, I'd say Mozart.
Okay, good. Okay, the next wine is the 2016 Cabernet Sauvignon. Do a little smell and a taste to inspire you.
Classic rock.
Okay. And then, last but not least, the Paramount Red.
I would say dinner time jazz or some female singers. Eartha Kitt.
Okay. Got two quick questions for you. One is, this should be pretty easy, but if all things went to hell and you were sent to a deserted island, which
this question.
which three wines would you take with you?
Are they in 750 formats?
They are in 750. They're in 2,000 ml formats.
Holy cow. A desert island. I say this of these three wines?
No, any wine. Any wine.
This is where we're going to edit out the pauses. I'm thinking of, I would probably take a Loire Burgundy from Burgundy, because we've had some special moments in those cellars, and three wines. I would take, there is a Riesling I would really think about taking.
Okay.
And then I would probably take the Marianne, the bottle we named Marianne, which is a Cabernet Franc and Merlot blend from our Mount Veeder vineyard and named after my mother.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, and one more question. Which winemaking region in the world is at the top of your bucket list to explore?
Oh, geez, Louise, all of them. Well, in December of last year, before COVID, I was supposed to go to Chile for the total eclipse and visit some Chilean friends down there who are in the very south. And so I had this whole tour planned, and I haven't really taken much of a vacation for 20 years. And so I had this whole route planned out. And so I'd like to get back to that. More out of curiosity than if you said it was the last time you could ever travel and see a wine region, I might choose something else, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. Well,
I'm sure you have a long list, as we all do. It's just which one is going to get there first. So maybe Chile is the one you have to make up from a postponement?
Yes, and I think that I've seen some of the famous wine growing regions, and I think I'd pick some esoteric ones.
And what about if someone wants to come here to Napa Valley and visit Gamble Family Vineyards? Can they do it, and how can they do that?
Well, we have a website that you can look at, but you can also write an email to wine@gamblefamilyvineyards.com and say you're interested in visiting. And we are private, and this allows us to not over-reserve, because as you see, we have a couple tasting rooms and some tables outside. So every small group has their own private client manager that they often get to know over time and become good friends with as they return. And you ask, and in the email you let us know when you want to come, and we see if we have some availability.
Great.
We're exclusive, so you can have an exclusive experience, not because we're snobby.
And you can sit out looking at the beautiful vineyards as I am doing right now. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us on Wine Soundtrack. Let's go walk in the vineyard.
Woohoo! My favorite thing.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.